If you've listened to this show regularly over the past few months, you know that I've done a couple of monologues on the aviation industry. The frequency of near disasters in the sky has increased dramatically in recent years, and as I've noted, the increase began around the same time that the Obama administration began a concerted effort to diversify the FAA, including air traffic control. Now, according to a NASA database, which tracks self-reported data from pilots, we now average roughly 5 near misses per week, more than double the number from a decade ago. And that's not even getting into the obvious maintenance issues that have been, popping up, including doors and wheels that have been flying off of planes mid-flight. Now, given how terrible all of this looks from the outside, I wanted to get a better idea of what's happening internally at the FAA and major airlines in this country. We hear a lot about DEI in the abstract sense, but when we rarely get a glimpse of what it looks like in practice. We don't often hear firsthand testimonials from people affected by DEI because they're worried about, protecting their careers, so they don't talk about it. They know if they speak out, they'll face termination. They'll probably be blackballed from the industry forever. But with social media, some level of anonymity is possible. So to take a closer look at how far this DEI rot has spread, I tweeted this. If you're an airline pilot and have firsthand knowledge about the DEI agenda being forced into your profession, send me a DM and tell me about your experiences. Curious, yet terrified to see how bad it is at this point. Now, I sent that out a couple weeks ago. To say that my inbox was completely flooded would be an understatement. I received too many DMs to count from pilots and other professionals in the aviation industry. Virtually every message that I read told me the same thing, that the ideology of diversity, equity, and inclusion is the top priority in their workplaces. It goes without saying, but this is an industry where one mistake can kill hundreds or even thousands of people. This is not comparable to DEI departments in universities or corporate America, as destructive and wasteful as those departments are. DEI in the aviation industry could lead to a catastrophic disaster. And that's why, even though it was a risk, several of these sources provided me identifying information to validate their identities, along with permission to post some of the internal documents and footage that they obtained and shared with me. These people knew that they might lose their jobs, but they decided to, that getting the word out was more important. Yesterday, I posted some of this material on my Twitter feed. They reveal that at the very highest levels of the FAA, there's an effort underway to reduce the number of white men who work in the aviation industry. This is a priority of the FAA. In April of 2022, the FAA's acting deputy chief operating officer, a woman named Angela McCullough, led a meeting with the FAA's Flight Operations Division. This division is responsible for all aspects of aviation operations, including overseeing airline maintenance. So it's a pretty important division. But McCullough did not spend the call talking about ways to make sure that airplane doors don't fly off mid-flight. She didn't say a word about the importance of keeping the wheels attached to jetliners as they're taking off. Instead, McCullough talked extensively about DEI. As you'll see, she was prompted to do so by a man named Will Riggins, who's the FAA's vice president of flight program operations. And if that name does sound familiar to you at all, it's probably because Riggins is the same guy who conspired to find ways to hide Pete Buttigieg's spending on government aircraft. So we've seen him in the news before for all the wrong reasons. And then this, we know, means that this is a completely corrupt group of bureaucrats who have come around and assembled here to talk about the problems of white men in aviation. And here's a little bit of that. Watch.
And we're looking at that, but we're also looking at really a need across the agency to recruit and retain a diverse population of folks. And as you mentioned earlier, how much that adds to the process. What do you think are some of the key points that we need to remember as we embark on this challenge going forward?
That's a pretty good question. I think one of the things we need to now is that everyone else is embarking on the same thing, right? Just across the system. So competition is going to be it's just going to be really heavy, right? So I think we need to know that. I think it's going to take some creativity. You heard Tim saying he and I had talked about, and we're going to you all is, are there opportunities for any partnerships with universities or trade schools that specialize? We kind of talked about from ramp to cockpit. Is there some things that we would want to look at there?
So Will Riggins says, we're looking at a need across the agency to recruit and retain a diverse population of folks. And in response, McCullough talks about the arms race of DEI that's occurring in the industry. And she mentions partnerships with universities. And then she says that the FAA wants to look at something called ramp to cockpit. Now let's think about both of these things for a minute. When she's talking about partnerships with universities in the name of diversifying aviation, McCullough is referring to relationships that airlines have established with historically black colleges and universities. And for example, United Airlines has allied with Elizabeth City State University. The airline describes this as a, quote, partnership that seeks to not only train future pilots, but also bring more women and people of color into the ranks of commercial aviation. In case it's not obvious, Elizabeth City State University is not a hotbed of engineering or aviation talent. In fact, it's not a hotbed of any kind of skill whatsoever. The average SAT score at the school is 960 out of 1,600, which is one of the lowest scores you'll find anywhere in the country as an average score for a university. The only reason for partnerships like this is because of the racial makeup of Elizabeth City State University, which is overwhelmingly black. This is the kind of partnership that, based on this video, senior FAA officials want to see more of. They want to partner with the worst, most mediocre, least impressive universities in the country. They're not interested in seeing the best pilots in the cockpit. They're interested in seeing more black pilots and, quote unquote, diverse pilots in the cockpit. That also could explain why McCullough is promoting something called ramp to cockpit in that footage. When she says ramp, she's referring to ramp agents who are responsible for loading and unloading baggage on airplanes. So evidently, the FAA believes that these employees deserve some sort of specialized program to encourage them to become pilots. But nowhere in this footage does McCullough explain why this makes any sense whatsoever. It does not follow. Okay, this doesn't follow in any way. The job of a baggage handler is completely different from the job of an airline pilot. They are totally different. There are precisely zero transferable skills or even interests. The only thing that makes them the same is that you're both working around a plane. Just because you have a job working around a plane doesn't mean you should be flying them. This is like having a janitor to surgeon pipeline at a hospital, or setting up a program so that the window washer cleaning the outside of the skyscraper can one day become an architect designing skyscrapers. These two lines of work have almost nothing to do with each other. So what's the point of this? Well, a few seconds later, McCullough provides something of an answer. She tells the FAA's senior leadership in flight operations that their whole division is, quote, white male dominated. Then she says that, that should change. And Will Riggins, rather than reacting with surprise to this suggestion, of course, agrees with her. Watch.
We need to be willing to have a conversation about kind of what's standing in our way from approaching some of these things differently than we have historically approached them. And just even the internal bias, I mean, particularly in flight ops, your whole program is very heavily male dominated. It just is. And really, it is white male dominated. Let's just say what it is. And so let's be willing, that is today what it is. And then let's talk about what could the future look like if we really had this program that was representative of the whole country, right, of the whole world. And sometimes those are challenging or difficult, or I would say people get a little bit uncomfortable talking about that. And like, hey, we're not going to make change unless we get a little bit uncomfortable. And let's be uncomfortable together, and let's do the right things and support each other moving forward. So I don't know if you wanted all that, but you got it, sir.
No, Angela, that's great. Honestly, those are some words that we really need to spend some time, I think, kind of digging through and thinking about.
Now, one thing you know that if you hear somebody on the left use the phrase, we need to have an uncomfortable conversation, you know that the dumbest thing in the world is about to follow from that. Whatever comes next is going to be the dumbest thing you've ever heard. That's the way it always works. And of course, there's no pushback from anybody in that clip as they listen to this. Nobody says, well, wait a minute, why should baggage handlers become pilots? And what's wrong with having a lot of white men in flight operations exactly? What is the problem? What problem has been caused by the disproportionate number of white men? What issue are you trying to solve, lady? They don't say that. Instead, this woman gets complimented for her insights. But of course, not everybody on that call was in agreement. They didn't want to speak up because they'd be fired, but they knew that this was going to happen. So one individual recorded the meeting, and this source had seen several white men get passed over for jobs because of their skin color, and he or she heard these kinds of remarks all the time at the FAA, and that's why they saved it. and saved the video, and that's why we have it now. If you're getting ready to watch the big game this weekend, you need to check out Bet Online. Bet Online has the largest offering of betting odds in the world. You can bet on virtually anything, from how many total passing yards Patrick Mahomes will get. We'll get to whether Reba will forget a word of the national anthem, or if you think Taylor Swift will make it from Japan to cheer on Travis. BetOnline is the best online sports betting platform. They pride themselves on their higher than average betting limits of up to $25,000. You can increase your wagering amounts by contacting their player services desk by phone or email. So don't be the odd man out when everybody around you is talking about their betting predictions on the biggest sporting event of the year. Go to betonline.ag to place your bets for the big game this Sunday. Use promo code Walsh for a 50% instant deposit bonus of up to $1,000. That's betonline.ag and use promo code Walsh. BetOnline. The options are endless. As of this morning, neither the FAA nor the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, have responded to this footage. That's because it reflects exactly what they believe. This is what they talk about behind closed doors. They want fewer white people flying planes and working in flight operations, including maintenance. They want fewer white people doing everything. They want more baggage handlers to become pilots. And they're not remotely concerned about professional standards or competence or safety. That topic just doesn't come up in their discussions. This is what DEI is all about. It's not limited to Pete Buttigieg's agency. In response to my post, I received several other tips from sources outside of the FAA who say that they are seeing similar policies all across the aviation industry. Airlines are promoting DEI just like the FAA is, even when it clearly endangers passengers. So here's another example. One source, a pilot at Delta Airlines, told me this, quote, "We recently had a transgender pilot repeatedly receive negative reviews during his first-year probationary period from captains he flew with regarding attitude, CRM, and judgment. Yet the Chief Pilot Office, CPO, was unwilling to address the issue. Had this not been a transgender pilot, the individual would likely not have successfully completed their probationary period. Coincidentally, that CPO has a management pilot on staff who recently transitioned, who was able to weigh in on these matters." This is what the airlines and the FAA will never admit publicly. They'll never admit that they're lowering standards and endangering the public in order to get more diverse pilots flying planes. And from an official standpoint, it's because they haven't passed a policy officially saying the standards are being lowered. Instead, what happens in practice is exactly what this pilot told me, and many other similar stories I heard, that they kind of unofficially look the other way when incompetent people who are in a preferred group are screwing up. And that's what's happening. The source also sent along this internal Delta Airlines manual that's designed to help Delta pilots, quote, transition into another gender. And here's what that looks like. It reads, "Helpful steps for transitioning at Delta." And of course, there's the pilot with the gay, trans pride flag or whatever draped over his body, like exactly what you want to see, right? It goes without saying that, this is incredibly irresponsible for several reasons. Put aside the fact that Delta is discriminating against qualified pilots on the basis of their skin color and their gender and promoting incompetent pilots instead. This document shows that Delta is also going out of their way to recruit trans-identifying pilots, people who have extremely high rates of mental illness and a propensity for suicide. Remember, these are people who, according to the trans activists themselves, are at risk of killing themselves if they're misgendered or if they don't receive all the affirmation they feel they need. This is a category of people with suicidal ideation rates that are like exponentially higher than the general population. And the FAA and Delta want more of them flying commercial aircraft. In fact, in private, they're open about the fact that they're willing to endanger the public in order to hit diversity goals. Recently on Twitter, somebody named Trace Woodgrains has been looking closely at FAA documents that were unearthed in a long-running class action lawsuit filed against the agency back during the Obama years. And he found proof that the agency does not care if diversity, quote unquote, costs people their lives. Like they've put it in writing. In 2013, for example, FAA leaders reviewed this slide, and the slide reads, "Key questions for leadership. What are the relative values of diversity in the prediction of performance/outcomes? There is a trade-off between diversity, adverse impact, and predicted job performance outcomes. How much of a change in job performance is acceptable to achieve diversity goals?" So there it is, as clear as possibly could be. Like, they are willing to trade job performance in order to achieve diversity goals. And what does job performance mean when you're an airline pilot? If you perform poorly in your job as an airline pilot, it means like 200 people die. Now, I can answer the question that they've asked rhetorically. What kind of trade-off is acceptable? Well, no trade-off in job performance is acceptable to achieve any diversity goals in any industry, especially the airline industry. Like, the whole mission of the FAA is supposed to be to make sure that people don't die on airplanes. Really, it should be summed up that way. But increasingly, it's clear that that's just not important to the FAA. I didn't mention this on Twitter, but one of the sources who DM'd me sent me this information as well. This is another DM I got. Quote, I was unaware of this until recently, but the FAA has authorized special issuance medical certificates to individuals on SSRIs. The FAA and the Airline Pilot Association are looking to broaden/expand the SSRI and mental health on-ramps back to being able to exercise a first-class medical certificate. In other words, the agency is doing everything it can to ensure that pilots taking antidepressants can fly. These are pilots who are struggling with depression and who need medical assistance with their depression, that they can be flying people in the sky. At the same time, the source says, quote, the FAA just sent a letter requesting Congress not to raise the mandatory retirement age from the current age of 65, and the FAA primarily states safety as a justification. Obviously, there's zero safety data that shows a switch is flipped when you turn 65 and you're somehow instantly less competent. We all know competent 70-year-olds and incompetent 50-year-olds running around. The point is that the FAA and the Pilots Association are much more willing to go along with the idea that SSRIs and transitioning pilots should be at the controls, and that's somehow more safe than someone who just woke up on their 65th birthday. So these are the kinds of incoherent medical standards we've come to expect in the FAA. A year ago, for example, the FAA abruptly lowered its medical certification guidelines for pilots with heart block. And this is a serious condition. It makes it harder for the heart to pump blood effectively. Before the change, pilots with first-degree block had to provide medical documentation proving they had, quote, no evidence of structural function or coronary heart disease. Now, many pilots with first-degree heart block can fly without this documentation. There was a lot of speculation that this was due to complications of the COVID shot or that this might implicate the safety of passengers. The FAA denied that. But of course, we have no reason to believe anything they say anymore. This is what we can expect from the federal government at this point. Even on matters of life or death, they have just no credibility. There are some more documents I posted on Twitter along these lines, including some insider information on how the FAA awards contracts to various small businesses. These small businesses handle important engineering and logistic tasks for the agency. But it turns out that these contracts, like everything else these days, often prioritize socially disadvantaged businesses, which according to federal regulations typically means that they aren't owned by white people. In the FAA's EFAST contract system, these disadvantaged businesses get first dibs at contracts valued under $150,000. And what this means is that the FAA has adopted a gender and race-based spoils system for pretty much everything. At every step, whether you're a baggage handler, a pilot, a contractor, you will get priority treatment if you look a certain way. The only way to bring an end to this madness is for more whistleblowers to do what these whistleblowers did yesterday and speak out about it. Record the meetings where they tell you they don't want white people working for them. Save the document showing they're promoting incompetent pilots because they're trans. If we expose enough of this, then it might finally collapse the whole scheme under the weight of its own absurdity. If we don't, if we allow it to fester, as everyone on that FAA video conference did, then before long, as I've been warning now for months, a lot of people are going to die as a result. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.